Morning, everybody. I'm Michelle LeBrac. I am the literacy coach over at the Greenwood School. Let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I was a first and second grade looping teacher for 9 years up in the Triton Regional School District, and then I came down to Wakefield and I've been working as a reading specialist for these last 9 years here, and this is my first year as a literacy coach. Our district has implemented this position, so my role is to work not only with students but with teachers and helping them develop their literacy practices in both reading and writing. So it's a really exciting role. I love working with teachers, and it's different working with adults than it is working with 5, 6, 7-year-olds, but I still get my daily dose of adults. So one of the things that comes up every time I'm speaking with parents is, how do I help my child with reading at home? What's something that I can do to develop and foster a love of reading? So there's 30 years of research out there that shows us that children who read the most, read the best, achieve the most at school, have higher graduation rates, move on to have very successful lives. And the amount of reading that they do as children is directly correlated with that. So our goal as teachers and our goal as parents is to help develop and foster that love of reading, because that love of reading has to be there for them to engage in the act of reading. So research has shown that the single most important activity to build knowledge that a child needs to be successful in school is to read aloud to them. It sounds simplistic, doesn't it? Read aloud is something that's going to yield such incredible results, but it's been a proven fact. Reading aloud should continue, it should start at infancy and continue all the way through school. What we find, unfortunately, is by the time children reach 4th grade, oftentimes read aloud subsides at home, when in reality it should continue and be such a strong component of your at-home relationship with your child. And we'll get into why that is. So if our goal is to instill within our children a love of reading, we want them to be lifetime readers. We don't want them to just read for the purposes of school. We need to instill with them that love. But there's a really sobering trend. But before I even talk about that, I want you to think about, how many of you have kindergartners or children going into kindergarten? I love kindergartners because, well, first of all, they tell you exactly what they think. They're very, very transparent. I know when I'm working with kindergartners, if I don't have my contacts in and I wear my glasses, they tell me. When I need to get my hair colored, they tell me. They're very, very they're very honest. But their enthusiasm for reading is sky high. It's through the roof, regardless of gender. Typically, when on the first day of school, I was in a lot of the kindergarten classrooms and just talking with the kiddos, and I would say, "What do you want to learn this year?" And they all do comment about they're excited about recess, but they're also super excited to be readers. Without fail, 100% of the students, for the most part, mention how they want to learn how to read. But then as time goes on, that enthusiasm for reading starts to diminish. By 4th grade, we only have about 54% of students who are reading for pleasure daily. By 8th grade, it's only 30% of students. By the time they hit their senior year in high school, it's dropped down to 19% who read for pleasure daily. And though that was a study that came out in 2004, the numbers are pretty similar today. When we look, though, at adults, that reading for pleasure seems to be the same. It correlates. In 2002, a study found that only 46% of adults read any sort of fiction in that previous year. They asked if anyone had been, what the percentage was for readers of nonfiction, reading newspapers or reading magazines. The number only jumped up to 50%. So it's not that we are an illiterate nation, but it's almost as if we are an illiterate nation. Our lives are so busy. Everything is very hectic. But if our goal is to instill a love of reading in our children, we have to start making time for reading aloud at home. So I'll talk to you a little bit about some ways to do that. Because you have your child at home for 7,800 hours during the school year. We only have them in school for 900 hours. So we have to think of ways that at home you can work to foster that love of reading. So before we move on to the importance of read aloud, I want to talk to you about how skilled reading develops. This is a little small up here. You do have it in your handout. It's a bit larger to be able to see. So reading is a very, very, very complex process. When you think about how a child learns to read, the first thing that we tend to think about is the decoding aspect, being able to actually break apart the words on the page. This rope analogy helps us see all of the different facets that go into learning how to read. So at the bottom here, these are the coding aspects that have to do with learning how to read. The type of competencies that a child has to have under their control so that reading is automatic. That it has to do with their ability to break words apart.
Excuse the interruption, but this is a quick announcement for those that had signed up to have the session using assistive technology to enhance learning in room 229. The presenter, Jeannie Gately, has arrived, so if you would make your way to that class, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so the word recognition competencies have to do with coding, what helps a child read automatically. So that's connected to their ability to hear sounds in words. Do they hear syllables? Do they hear rhyme? Do they hear the sounds that make up the individual words? It has to do with their ability to break words apart, and it has to do with their ability to recognize words quickly. That's their sight word recognition. So these competencies all have to do with being automatic. But the competencies up at the top, the language comprehension competencies, I think of those as the invisible competencies that we don't see when a child is learning to read, but they are so important. They have to do with content knowledge, and they have to do with their understanding of how our language works. Background knowledge, that is all of the experiences you bring with you that you've accrued through your life. If you have a large body of background knowledge, you're going to understand a text far better. Your vocabulary knowledge has to do with the body of words that you understand, but vocabulary doesn't just entail the words that you read on a page. You have a listening vocabulary, you have a reading vocabulary, you have a writing vocabulary, and you have a speaking vocabulary. So it's very multifaceted. The language structures have to do with the understanding of how our language sounds, the grammar of our language, how to compose a sentence orally. Have to be able to do that orally before they can read the language on a page. Verbal reasoning, this is an enormous aspect of reading comprehension. This has to do with your child's ability to make predictions, make connections, synthesize information, make inferences as they're reading, analyze information, critique a story, think about an author's purpose. It's all of those higher level comprehension skills that come into your understanding of a text. And finally, the last bullet has to do with literacy knowledge. That's, do they understand how a book works? how to, particularly, preschool, kindergarten, the cover, which direction to move in. You don't hold the book this way. Just the basics of how a book works, as well as how different genres work. Students have to learn that when they're reading, you approach a fiction book differently than you approach a nonfiction book. It was written for a different purpose. The author crafted it a unique way. So in nonfiction stories, there are different sorts of structures. Events are arranged chronologically. There's more cause and effect. So the way it is crafted is very different, and we want our children to start to have a lens through which they look at different genres. They need to know what to expect when they open a mystery. They need to know what to expect when they open a biography. So all of these competencies in the language comprehension area of reading, you can develop through reading aloud to your child at home. It is the single most important activity that you can do with your children to prepare them to be readers, to foster their reading development, and to continue to build their ability. So if you look at, so that was really like a strong statement. If you look at why read aloud, it's just, there's so many important aspects to it. If you look at these aspects on the left side, these all have to do with the affective part of the brain, the social and emotional part of the brain. Think about when you're reading aloud to your child, all those experiences and feelings that you are creating. That is so vital. But then on this right side, these are the more cognitive aspects of read aloud. It conditions the brain to think about reading as a pleasurable activity. As humans, we repeat that which is pleasurable. So if read aloud is an enjoyable time with your child, they're naturally going to want to gravitate towards reading. It plants the desire to read. There has to be an awareness of reading, of a literate environment in the home before a child is going to want to pick up a story, to pick up a book and read it. You're providing a model to your child. Your child will do hopefully what they see you doing. If you're spending time reading, they're going to want to spend time reading. And I've thought a lot about this. I have a young child, a 2.5-year-old at home. A lot of my reading now is done online, like on my iPad or on my phone. That makes it less visible to my daughter. So I'm making a conscious effort, amongst all the other crazy things that happen, to make sure I'm picking up books and she sees me reading and I'm reading to her, and it's not just on an electric tablet. So that's something that we have to think about, making it more visible to students. It creates background knowledge and it increases vocabulary and grammar, and I'm going to talk about that next. So, background knowledge. It's something we all have. If you have lived, you have background knowledge, because it has to do with your experiences, what the experiences you have accrued over your lifetime. But children all have varying degrees of background knowledge. The more background knowledge you have, the more understanding you bring to your reading. So we want to build our children's background knowledge. It's impossible for them to have the widest range of experiences, for them to understand every text that they're going to encounter. But by reading aloud to them, we increase their background understanding. So I have a good example of how background knowledge supports your understanding. I'm going to read you 2 really short little paragraphs. See if there is one that you better understand. Okay. But Sabathia, who pitched 3 days earlier in Game 3, gave up a leadoff broken bat double to Austin Jackson. He struck out the next 2 batters, then walked Miguel Cabrera intentionally with first base open. Got it? So now listen to this one. Khalees Rhodes put on 84 but with the ball turning. Mark Waugh could not hit with impunity, and his 8 overs cost only 37. The runs still had to be scored at more than 7 and over, with McGrath still to return and Warren having 2 overs left when Rhodes pulled rifle to Bevan at deep square leg. Some of you are going, let's talk about the first paragraph. What do you know what I was talking about? Yeah, it was baseball. You have background experience with baseball, so it made sense. I have a lot of background experience with baseball, so when I was reading it, I knew when to pause. I knew how to pronounce Miguel Cabrera's name. I had a better understanding about how to read and understand that text. Does anyone know what the second paragraph was about? It was about cricket. So, and I have no background experience with cricket, so I don't even know if I was pronouncing the vocabulary correctly. I don't know if I was pausing correctly. I had nothing to draw upon to help myself as a reader of that. And I couldn't use a lot of other strategies to help me. I couldn't make many predictions or connections or analyze the information or synthesize the information because I didn't have that background knowledge. So, as parents, one of our goals is to build our child's wealth of background knowledge. You can do it through providing them with as many varied experiences as possible. You can do it through reading aloud a wide range of texts about as many different things as you can. So the next thing I want to talk about with Read Aloud has to do with vocabulary. When I first think about vocabulary, I just think of it as, okay, these are the words I read on a page. But it is so much more than that. Your child's vocabulary all starts as a listening vocabulary. So think of their brains as a reservoir, and in order for words to get in there, they have to hear them. They're not going to say them if they haven't heard them. They're really going to struggle to read them if they haven't heard them. And they're not going to use them in their writing if they have not heard this vocabulary, if they don't have an expansive vocabulary. So one of the ways to build vocabulary is through exposing them to a wide range of texts. So there's different types of vocabulary words, and we focus upon these in school. We think of Tier 1 words as basic, concrete words that we use in everyday speech. There's about 10,000 words that are Tier 1 words. 5,000 of them that it's thought we use often every day, and there's another 5,000 that we use a little less often. But these Tier 1 words are what make up our basic lexicon, our common language. But it's your child's grasp and understanding of Tier 2 words and Tier 3 words that are predictors of their school success. So Tier 2 words are the words that appear in more content area texts, as well as picture books, the text that you're going to read aloud to your students. They're high utility words because they appear often. They're more complex: sauntered, boasted, vehicle. These types of words are all over children's literature. You need to hear them and talk about them with you before they encounter them at school. Yes, we do teach the meanings of these words, but it'll be so much more helpful if they're hearing them at home in read-alouds and discussions and conversations with you. And Tier 3 words are really highly specialized words that have to do with the content areas, like, for example, photosynthesis. You're not going to use that word in your everyday conversation, but you could use it when you encounter it in a story. You're talking about a specific content. So the strength of our vocabulary is based on our ability to grasp and use Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. So one of the things that's important for us to think about is, like, how do we expose them to these rare vocabulary words? And there was a study done about how to build your child's vocabulary the basic understanding that we need to expose them to complex vocabulary as early as we can. They need to be using this language. But then, so how do we do this? I thought it was fascinating when you look on the right side, the number of rare vocabulary words per 1,000. So when an adult is speaking to a 6-month-old, they're using 9.3 of these tier 2 and tier 3 words per 1,000 words. When an adult is talking to a 3-year-old, it drops slightly to 9 words. So I was wondering about that, and I was thinking about it, all right, when I'm talking to Gracie at home, I do tend to use at times less sophisticated language to help her understand what I'm talking about. So that must be why the drop is there, but I'm rethinking that. Should I be doing that consistently? So adults to 10-year-old, 11 of those tier 2 and tier 3 words. You can see it jumps up slightly from adult to adult, jumps up to 22 on primetime TV. A typical children's book, which has well more than 1,000 words in it, usually. There's 30 of these tier 2 and tier 3 words per 1,000 words. An adult book jumps up to 52, and a newspaper jumps up to 68. So think about it. A children's book is 3 times richer in vocabulary than just our regular everyday conversation. So it really drives home that point of using read aloud to build this vocab. So one of the questions we often get is, all right, I have a child who's in 4th grade. They're older now. Is it really that important to continue to read aloud to them? And it truly is, because your child's ability to listen and comprehend is higher than their comprehension level when they're actually doing that reading themselves. When you're reading, you're having to attend to multiple things at the same time. You're having to decode, you're having to think about meaning, you're having to think about the structure of the language. There's a lot that the mind is considering all at one time. When you remove the actual process of decoding the reading from it, and you're just reading aloud to the child, they can comprehend at a higher level because you freed them up to just think about the text. So when you're reading aloud to a child, don't be shy away from reading more complex texts than what they could read on their own. It also speaks to, many times parents feel like, all right, 3rd and 4th graders, they're into chapter books now. There's not as many, I'm not going to go into the library and read this type of book, which is what you typically think of when you think of a picture book. But the library is full of really complex picture books that are designed for 8, 9, 10-year-olds. So this book, Marvin of the Great Northwards, for example, when you look at the illustrations, you may think it's pretty simplistic. The content is very complex. It really wouldn't be appropriate for a younger child in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. The concepts in here are more geared towards a discussion with a 3rd and 4th grader. So don't shy away from picture books with your older readers. By older, I mean 3rd and 4th grade. You want to be reading aloud these types of texts to them. So you also may be thinking, all right, where do I find these books? How do I know which books are great books? So in your packet, I have some resources for you. I can't recommend this book more highly. It's called the Read Aloud Handbook. It's in its 7th edition. It's a 1 million copy bestseller. I have it earmarked. I return to it over and over again. This author has organized for you into wordless books, predictable books, reference books, picture books, short novels, full-length novels, poetry, anthologies, folk tales, and fairy tales, and he gives you the listening level of the text. So you can say, all right, it's a listening level that's appropriate for my 4th grader. So I can't recommend this more highly. And then this text I absolutely love. It's called What to Read When. It's written by Pam Allen, and I had the pleasure of hearing her speak She is a phenomenal literacy researcher and guru, and she has created this text around themes. So she's arranged it so that if you want to find a book that helps discuss courage, she gives you 10 or 12 different titles at different age ranges for that. If you want to discuss the challenge of being separated from someone you love, overcoming adversity, a new baby coming into the family, like she hits the 50 essential themes of childhood in this text. This is a great, great resource. I'm pretty sure they have it at the BB, but you may want to think about getting it for your home because it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. This takes me down, I'm going to kind of quickly talk about these things. When you're reading aloud, it's a way to help your child grapple with difficult issues. Sometimes with children, it might be easier to broach a challenging topic using a read aloud as the springboard for your discussion. Read alouds broaden your child's worldview. They learn to think about people in different communities, in different settings than themselves, that they wouldn't typically be thinking about. And what's wonderful about Read Aloud is it's not tied to schoolwork. It's fun. It's a great experience with mom and dad. So you're going to have a bolstered motivation to read when you're reading with your child. So I hope that people don't stop reading out loud with their older children. So this author of What to Read When talks about how to set up your environment at home so that you have a lifelong reader. And this acronym is very helpful for thinking about it. Think about creating rituals around Read Aloud with your children. I know I think back to the rituals that I had as a child, and they still stick with me. Before every holiday, my mom would go to the library and get out some books that were particular to that holiday, and our read aloud would be about that holiday leading up to it. Before we had, actually, I'll tell you a different story. My father, he just retired, but he was a 3-sport coach at a high school. So sports were paramount in my home, and he would read the sports page every morning at the table, looking for like the write-up about his team from the previous game or the week, whatever happened over the weekend. So he was always reading the sports page out loud at the table when I was in middle school and high school. And at the time, I wasn't realizing it, but that instilled within me, I love reading about sports. I subscribe to SI, I get ESPN the magazine, and I don't listen to music on my ride to work every morning. I listen to 98.5 The Sports Hub. So it just has created within me a love of that type of language about sports. And it all had to do with my dad reading the sports page. That was an unintentional ritual, but it became a ritual in our family. Environment and access go together. Ask your child what sort of setting they would love to have for reading at home. Do they want to have like a little beanbag where they can sit and have like a comfy, cozy nook? Could you create a reading nook in your home for them or in their room? Could you put baskets of books all throughout the house so that there's easy access to them? Could you have, and this is one thing that is highly recommended now for younger children, instead of having the typical bookshelves or bookcases where you put the books in so it's just the spine facing out, that's not terribly appealing to children, to readers. It doesn't let them see what's there for a book. If you buy bookshelves that are ledges and you face the books with the cover facing out, it's far more inviting for your readers to just go up and grab that book. There's all sorts of things on Pinterest right now about how to set up areas in your home so it looks like that. So actually a wall, one area of a wall in my little girl's room is shelving facing out. And books just facing out, and it's a great way to decorate too, because the covers of children's books are beautiful artwork, so you can think of it that way as well. Access. You want to have multiple types of books in your home. So you want books that are, like I had said, above their reading level, that they could read on their own, that you read to them. You want to have books that are just right for them, books that aren't too hard, aren't too easy, at their reading level. And as your children progress, I know there's a lot of children, parents here with children that are coming into kindergarten. You'll learn more about books that are just right for them as they come into school. And you want to have books there that are easy for them. The easy books are like ice cream for them. They'll pick them up, they'll read them, and it'll build their confidence and their motivation. You don't want to have all of the reading that they do to be challenging and frustrating. You want some easy reading, and you do want them to reread books and repeat reading of stories. That's a way to build their reading ability. It builds their fluency. And finally, dialogue. I think this is one of the most important things to do with Read Aloud. It's not just about reading the book, it's the conversation you have with the child after or as you're reading the story. That is as important. The book is a springboard for discussion. So, and when we talk about discussion, this is something that might be a little bit unfamiliar to parents. You want to foster discussion that is open-ended. Something where there's not a set, it doesn't necessarily have to be a right or a wrong answer. Because the fastest way to shut down a conversation with your child is to ask the who, what, when, where, why questions about a book. They're getting that at school. Have your discussion be very open-ended and inquiry-based. So, what was new information in this book for you? Why do you think that? What was something from this story that surprised you? Tell me more about that. Was there anything from this book that was new to you? What are you thinking about as I close this book? Was there language that the author used that really jumped out at you? So those types of questions will help foster discussion. In your packet, there's a handout that gives you a lot of ideas for these types of questions. So the first section, these are within the text type of questions, things you can ask your child. This is more literal understanding of the text. You really want to focus on the beyond the text and about the text type of questions. These beyond the text questions will foster your child's ability to think inferentially. It'll get them to analyze a story, synthesize a story, make predictions, make connections, all those higher level thinking skills. When I talked earlier about the strands in the reading rope, the verbal reasoning that has to come into play with learning how to be a reader, these are the questions that foster that. And these questions down here also foster that, but they get your child to start to think about the author's craft and how the text was created. So what language did the writer use to really hook you into the story? Do you think this book sounds real or true? Why or why not? This is the type of thinking that the Common Core is also asking them to engage in, more higher level thinking beyond just basic literal. At school, we'll be asking them to provide the evidence for their thinking. So hopefully you'll start to see them giving you evidence at home for their answers, why they're thinking what they're thinking. But just please be sure that your read aloud doesn't just stop at the reading of the book, that it further then springs into a conversation about the story. And how can it not? Like when you close a great book, what do you want to do as an adult? Well, as an adult, I want to talk about it. That's why we have book clubs and book discussions. So you want to model that with your child, talking about the story. All right. So, these are the 3 books that I mentioned to you that I cannot recommend more highly. Actually, I don't think I showed you this one. How to Get Your Child to Love Reading. It's another great resource when you're looking for the types of stories to read for particular situations.
Is that particular book for a child who's 6, having a challenge with reading, therefore not wanting to read? Is that particular book a good resource for that as well?
This is, yes, for ravenous and reluctant readers
Reluctant
alike.
would be our kiddo.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Reluctant. That was a good question. So when you're thinking about also about where do I find ideas about these books, you can go, these are some websites that give you the, it's like the Academy Awards for books, like the great sources for finding the award winners in books. But I cannot speak more highly about the librarians at the Beebe. They can tell you so much about particular stories. If you tell them a topic your child is interested in, they can typically put their fingers on a book like that will match your child's interest level. So it's a matter of finding a wide range of stories that's going to pique your child's interest. And so this gives you some different places to look, as well as checking the library. So that kind of concludes the aspect of the session having to do with Read Aloud. Does anyone have any questions about Read Aloud? The next section is slightly different.
Just a quick question. So obviously it's important for us to read aloud to our kids. Do you also suggest our kids read aloud? Maybe to us, or just read aloud in general?
Yeah, that's very, very important. That's coming at it from a different, you're going at it after a different skill there. The Read Aloud that you're doing is to develop those language competencies within your child, but them reading aloud to you is giving them practice becoming a more skillful reader, with reading with accuracy, with fluency, and then your discussion can help build their comprehension. But reading aloud helps them build their fluency and their accuracy. So yes, that's very important. Yeah. And you said your child is in kindergarten or going into kindergarten.
Yeah.
So they'll start bringing books home to you from school that they will have read at school that they can practice reading to you, and that's very, very important. Hi.
It strikes me with the questions about authors that my child may not really understand how a book is put together, what an author is. When do you introduce that? How do you explain it?
We start talking about that with them is right in kindergarten.
Okay.
So when you're reading to them, every time you start a book, when you read the title, read the author, read the illustrator, say, I wonder why the author wrote this book. Like, I wonder what this author knows about farms that made them want to write about new baby calves. Start having conversations where they consider who has written the story, and it gets them to start thinking about the craft of writing, because reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So when you start talking about the author, they start being a reader that reads through a different lens. They start thinking about it from the craft of writing as well. And also, if there's ever, like, this worked out beautifully, I didn't even plan it. There's information about the author on the back. So if it's a book that's of great interest, seek out some info about the author. There's great websites out there too. I don't know if I put it on my resource, but I can link it. Where you can go and read more about particular authors. You might find that your child gets really interested in one particular author, and you read lots of books about that author has written, and that leads to a lot of great conversations. You can talk about similarities that they're seeing in this author's style and whatnot. That's the sorts of things they're doing in school as well. Any other questions about Read Aloud?
Just to reinforce your earlier point about modeling, I have a sometimes reluctant third grade reader, and she's sometimes reluctant. She's always in third grade, but she actually verbalized that to me. I mean, I read 8 to 10 hours a day for work, and anytime I'm reading, it's either on the computer or on my phone. And I was trying to get her to do her daily reading, and she said to me, "Well, you never read."
Isn't it?
And so we've had to make a point of modeling by picking up a book more often.
Yeah. And I find too, again, they are taking in what we're doing, even if we don't realize they're taking that in.
Just to kind of follow up with that, my children are a little bit younger, but my 5-year-old mentioned the same thing. And selfishly, I find that when I want to read my book, it's like after they go to bed, like that's my time to read my book. And my husband was talking about how much mommy loves to read too, and my 5-year-old said, well, I don't get to see you read as much. So we've found a time now where there's no TV on, and we have a sectional, and my 2-year-old, pretends she's reading, and we all have time where I'm not even reading to them. We're all having just our time, so they see that I'm reading, and they interrupt me. Of course, it's not as enjoyable as after they go to bed to read, but they're seeing me enjoying my book, and they're enjoying their book, and because they didn't realize how much I love books
It's an important
until
piece.
after.
And you also touched upon the TV.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, that is such a challenge. It's a challenge with a 2.5-year-old who the iPad is the be-all and end-all of her life at times.
Yeah.
So we were, as I was preparing for this, talking with my husband, I said, you know what, she's only 2.5, but we have to make a conscious decision that TV has to go off at a very specific time, and then the books can come out. And it's amazing what can happen in that time when the TV is off. And will it be painful? I think so at times. That's the reality, of the lives we live. But it's something that, if we want to foster this love of reading, we have to make it part of our literate environment at the home, in our home.
That's a good question. Because luckily I'm a writer, I'm a big reader. So my daughter sees me doing those things, and we've always read together. I've always read aloud to her. But now it's gotten to the point where she's in 4th grade, and that's our time every night before bed. She's passing out. I'm not getting the opportunity
to
discuss these things. And then I'll ask her, once we, go to lie down again and read, oh, well, what'd you think before? Because, I am very much a reader, and I like to talk about that kind of stuff and share my ideas. And she's like, I don't remember. She also has ADHD, which does not help. But, she is so accustomed to associating it with relaxation and going to bedtime. What can I do to...
Is there a way to move it to a different time of the day?
I just recently did that. Maybe my kids are younger, but I was finding the same thing. So now, I know we're talking about taking away from TV, but they get a half hour of TV before bed. That's their downtime, where we used to try to do books after, and it wasn't working. So now it's bath time, and we read our books upstairs before we even come downstairs to have that relaxed time. Yeah,
I have to say, because they do it all at school.
Yep.
Then we have to do it
Their
for
days
homework.
are longer. Yep.
Yeah, and then so the only time we do read to enjoy and find the time to read and actually enjoy and not have to do a reading log and this, that, and the other.
Right.
That
kills
is that bedtime. She doesn't even get to watch much TV, the poor thing.
Have you thought about books on tape in the car and building it into that time?
It's a friend of mine threw that out there yesterday. So it's been just recently been something in the back of my mind. So that's obviously something you suggest as well.
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
All right, good to know.
Definitely. But it's hard to find, it is hard to find that time.
Yeah, she associates it with bedtime.
Yeah, try to move it up a little bit in the day if you can.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So in looking at the time, I want to go on, that kind of concludes the read aloud portion. This is going to be a quicker portion because we don't have a lot of time left. But the other big question that comes up when I'm speaking with parents is, what do I say when my child is stuck on a word, when they're reading and they can't figure out the word? So I want you to think back, if you can. Do you remember your go-to strategy for when you were stuck on a word? That's you want. Does sound it out sound familiar to you all? Have you heard that phrase, sound it out?
It just makes my daughter angry.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'm
so irritable
so
for both of us.
The sound it out.
Come on, let's sound it out.
Not,
let's break up the word. We can do this, and I get a lot of spastic lightning bolts.
Let's talk about that. So when you ask a child to sound out a word, first of all, only 40% of words can be decoded that way. So that's a highly frustrating thing to say to a child when most words can't be sounded out. So to sound it out, I guess. And when a child is reading, we want them to be thinking about what's called multiple sources of information. I liken reading to driving a stick. You have to shift gears and go back and forth. And when they're reading, they have to be thinking about not just, when you ask them to sound it out, you're asking them to just think about that visual information. Does it look right? You are staying in this one area of that reading rope, reading strand. You're reinforcing one part of it, which is a very essential part of learning to read, that the coding part you have to have under control. You have to be able to decode things automatically. But you also want them to be thinking about what makes sense, that's semantic information, and what sounds right, that's syntactic information. So a reader that's reading with full fluency is fluctuating between those three sources of information all the time. What makes sense, what sounds right, what looks right. It's like lightning fast, we do it as we're reading. When you say sound it out, you're just reinforcing what looks right, and they can't usually come at it from that perspective, because if they could figure it out that way, they would have. So there are specific prompts that you can use to help your reader when they are stuck. I know it's hard to read that, it might be a little tiny, so in your packet you have a booklet that says how to support your child's reading at home, coaching your child on what to say instead of sounding it out. So some of the things you could say to help them think about meaning. Can the picture in the story help you? I wonder if thinking about what would make sense might help you. What's happening at this point in the story? Because oftentimes readers, especially early readers, they stop thinking about the story, they don't look at the picture, they zoom in right on that tricky word. When if they would just think about what was happening in the story, get their mouth ready to make that first sound, think about what word would sound right there, they get the word pretty quickly. Unless it's a sight word, and then you know what? You need to give it to them, because there's no other way they're going to be able to get that. But think about, there's all of these other things you can say aside from sound it out that will support them. When they're older, in 3rd and 4th grade, then you're going to have to say more about the structure of the word and the morphology of the word. Think about the base word, look at the beginning, look at the ending. It does come back to breaking it apart, but breaking it apart into larger, meaningful chunks while still thinking about the meaning and the structure of the story. But I wanted you to have another strategy in your parent toolbox for when you're reading with your child, because sound it out is frustrating for you and it's frustrating for your child. So you might want to try some of these other prompts as a reader, as a helper of a reader. Finally, in your resources, you will find, this is a list of really great, I've checked all these out, really helpful websites for reading aloud to your child. So these aren't websites where they go on and they play games. These are sites where they go on and a story can be read aloud to your child, where they can follow along. They can find more information about authors. It's specific to helping really immerse them in text as opposed to just fun games for the kiddos. So with that, does anyone have any
That works on the iPad.
You know what? The only one that I know doesn't work on the iPad is We Give Books. And I do believe all the others will.
My daughter will do anything on the iPad pretty much. I think it'll be put a computer for speed, which I don't know if that's normal, but she's.
That's
just
the
way
type
it is.
of world, that's the world we live in. So I do think that is. Does anyone have any questions, or are we?
We're using Earn to Learn. No, Learn to Earn. And it has, it's for reading logging, but it also has a social piece where my daughter's sharing what she's reading with her other classmates, and they're liking their other friends' books, and we kind of have a rule for that. She has to have read it before she can like it. Because the incentive is they get to jazz up their cartoon owl by getting rewards and all that. And so I like some parts of the incentivizing, and then there's other parts of it that I'm not so hot about. I wonder if you have any recommendations for apps that encourage reading that have some kind of reward system attached to them.
I have to be honest with you, I don't know a lot about that aspect of it, the particular apps, but I can do some research and find out.
I'd appreciate it.
And let you know, most definitely. That's a tricky topic, the incentivizing the reading, because you want there to be motivation to read, but sometimes when you place external reward, it makes it a challenge. It takes it away from being like intrinsically motivated. That external thing makes it a challenge. So just be conscious of that, in setting up activities for your child to want to read.
That's the piece that's been key for us, is realizing we have a job to do in this. We have to monitor how she's doing it, and it's not just a way to be social with her friends, and that doesn't become a focus over reading. But
But I'm glad you brought that up. I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Do you have any resources for reading aloud in foreign languages to your kids? I mean, you just hear the stories about how beneficial that is, and that was important in my childhood with my parents being from another country, and so just learning about that. I want them to experience that as well.
I have to be honest, I don't know resources off the top of my head, but I can look into that, most definitely.
I've looked online, but it's just so hard to find age-appropriate stuff, so maybe I could just read anything I find.
I would.
They laugh at me.
To be
when
quite
I speak
honest,
I
I think they would probably get more benefit from the experience of you reading a text in your native language and immersing them in that language. Coming to you would probably be more beneficial.
In French, they've got the bear, for the younger kid, like the bear at home. I have that at home. It's in French. It's all in French. And it's a picture book. It's really nice. A whole series of bear stuff.
I have to go to like Barnes and Noble and ask a librarian for more.
At the BB, they may be able to give you more specific
That'd be great.
information
Maybe
about
I'll do
that.
that.
I'll search that out for you as well, because I have, hopefully everyone put down their contact information. If you could just star your name on there, that would help me. And if you could star your name on there, that would help as well. Well, thank you all for coming today. Greatly appreciate it. I hope you found it helpful.